Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Hunting Beast Report. I'm your host, Scott Biskobing, and I am joined, as always, by the Hunting Beast himself, Mr. Dan Infault. Dan, what's good? How'd you handle the heat over the weekend? Did you do a lot of scouting?
No, I didn't.
It wasn't
I actually did work outside, though. I worked on the building, and it was pretty hot.
Just a little bit hot. Yeah, crazy temps we had here over the last several days. Even today, the humidity was super high. I was just on the phone shortly before I got here to the studio tonight with one of the guys from my crew, from the Midwest crew, and he's like, "When are we going to get up and do some scouting?" I said, I had it on my calendar to go this last weekend, weeks ago, but obviously that got thrown out the window real quick when that forecast came in. So, but yeah, we got an exciting show tonight for you guys again. Thanks for tuning in. We are joined tonight by, you know him, you love him, Mr. Aaron Warbritton from the Hunting Public, as if I needed to say that. How's it going, Aaron?
Pretty good. Excited to be here. Awesome.
Yeah, this is what's your second time on the show now?
Yep.
I think the last one was with Jeremy. So it's an honor for me to meet you, and glad to be able to sit down and chat with you tonight. So what's new in the Hunting Public world right now? What do you guys got going on this summer here?
Oh, I got a to-do list a mile long sitting next to this computer I'm trying to figure out our fall schedules and where everybody's going and what everybody's doing. And like we were talking about before we went live, we got guys that have been getting married and starting families and building houses and doing all kinds of things. So we're not all just living in the back seat of the car, driving around hunting every day like we were, 7, 8, 10 years ago. So scheduling is a big part of what I'm looking at right now, just trying to make sure that, we can go on these hunts together and still get out there and have a good time. It's just getting a little bit more difficult now than it used to be.
Whatever happened to that Smurf mobile? Is that in a museum someplace now, or what?
I gave it to one of my buddies. I put it on Instagram or something. I was like, I'll take $500, or if you show up, in the next 3 days, you can have it. And one of my buddies, he's like one of my best friends from back home in Paris, Missouri. He runs a bar and restaurant there in town called the Hootin' Chicken. And he called me up and he was like, "Hey, I'd take the Smurf if nobody's offering you anything." I'm like, "Hell, man, you can just have it." I said, "If you just ride with me up to Iowa and get it, you could just have it." So I just gave it to him. And I think he fixed one of the doors so he can actually get in and out of it now. But
nice.
The last time I saw it was this turkey season. It was parked out back behind his restaurant there when me and him went turkey hunting one morning. So it still lives.
I don't know. Fixing that door is kind of that sits a little funny with me. It's like fixing a tine that was broken off on a rack. It's like, I don't know. You can't alter that stuff.
Oh yeah, that thing's awesome. We were going to take it down to Texas to ranch fairies where we go pig hunting and blow it up with some tannerite or something, but we decided to.
Yeah, there you go.
I think this is a better way just to kind of keep it going.
Sure. So one of the reasons why we asked you to come on tonight the topic for tonight is we wanted to discuss your top 5 favorite kills. And kind of go into some of the tactics and the thought process that went into making some of those kills successful. But I think Dan also kind of phrased it as what was some of your favorite kills. And so I want to just bring up here real quick because you responded pretty quickly with what your actual favorite kills are, and that being some of these, correct?
Yeah. My stepson's first bow buck right there. That's my probably all-time favorite deer hunt, maybe all-time favorite hunt ever. He killed that buck last fall, and it's on the channel. I mean, y'all can watch it and see how excited we got after he shot that thing. But that was just up at my family farm in an old buddy stand that we've got up towards the top of the hill. And he hunted last fall. He practiced all summer last year, and he was really bound and determined to get one with a compound. And he practiced all summer, and then we got into deer season, and he hunted. I think we went out 8 times before he finally got a shot at this buck. And he's shooting very light poundage. So I've got him set up with kind of a heavier arrow and a cut on contact broadhead, and anything inside of 16, 17 yards is in his range, but it was going to have to be close. And this buck ended up chasing a doe right underneath us, and he just made a perfect shot, and we just pretty much lost it. And then my wife and my younger stepson, Graham, got to come out and track it. So we were all out there with my dad when we got to find it. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how I'll ever top that one. We just both pretty much lost it.
Yeah, I believe it. I'm looking forward to that day with my son too.
That was a pretty good buck. He had a lot of tines all over the place.
Yeah, he was a nice one. He was, like I told you earlier, that we had another big buck come in earlier in the night, but he didn't get a shot at him because he was playing a game on his phone. So the rest of the, but that was luckily that happened early in the evening. And he put his phone away after that. He's like, I'm never pulling that thing out again while I'm hunting. I'm like, well, it's a good lesson to learn. And the rest of the night, he was just glued on, anything that moved. And this buck actually ended up coming in where we could watch him from 300 yards away. He came up into the edge of this little opening in front of us and ran a doe around, and he snort wheezed and was grunting and chasing her. And, Miles is saying the whole time, like, this is awesome. He's like, I can hear him grunting. He's like 100 yards away. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty freaking awesome whenever you get to see them actually rutting and doing their thing. So it wasn't just you look down and a buck's there and he shot it. It was a pretty action-packed hunt. That buck ended up running that doe 180 degrees all the way around the tree, and we got to watch him for several minutes. So he was just heart pounding, and then the deer come right up underneath us, and I was able to kind of be in his ear in that buddy stand and say, like, wait till he gets right under us where you can't see you draw. And then the buck got right under the tree, and he drew back, and the buck just stopped in the perfect spot, and he just drilled him. So it was pretty awesome. Sweet.
What put you in that tree?
That's a tree that we've hunted that farm since I was knee high to a duck. I mean, I was little whenever my dad was taking me out there, and it's just a big white oak on the top of a ridge cap. And there's a little food plot out in front of us in the corner of the field, but behind that tree, there's a narrow lane that runs back in the timber with bedding on both sides. And what those deer do is they pop out in that lane where they can look out in that food plot. And a lot of times they won't come all the way out in the food plot until dark. In this instance, they were out in it, 30, 45 minutes before dark, but often they'll pop out in that lane and they'll work up that lane feeding on acorns before they want to pop out in that food plot. Before it gets dark, and that tree is kind of situated up in that lane. I just have always got good, consistent wind flow out of it for a west or a northwest wind. I mean, for whatever reason, I've hunted at different heights in it over the years, but I've never got busted out of it. And I've had deer come in from 360 degrees. I think it's just because it's on the very cap of the ridge, and your wind sucks down in a ditch to the east of the tree, and there's very few trails or deer travel that comes through there. So that's just for whatever reason. I mean, we've got a lot of videos from that exact spot where we're killing deer, and I've tried hunting lots of other spots on the farm, but that's definitely the best one if you get the right wind.
Awesome.
Nice.
Let's pull up this other one here that you sent me some pics of here.
Yeah, that's his first buck. That's his first one the year before. with a gun out of the same exact tree.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep, out of the same tree. And he was freezing and been sitting there for several hours, but he really wanted to get one. And he's like, man, I don't know how much longer I can stand it. I said, buddy, we can leave whenever you want. If you're not comfortable, we'll get out of here. He's like, well, if we leave, we ain't going to get one, are we? I said, no, we're not. We're going to get donuts, but we're not going to get a deer. And he's like, well, I'm going to stay then. So he stayed and was up there shivering. About 15 minutes later, this buck come crunching through the leaves and got him.
What is that, a 30-30?
Yes, that's the same gun I killed my first deer with. My granddad bought it before I was born.
Ah, nice.
And we hunt. I mean, that stand's kind of open out in front of you where you can shoot a pretty good ways, but most of our farm is timber. And most of the public land I grew up hunting is either oak timber or cedars or thick timber. So growing up, I didn't shoot a deer with a scope rifle until I got to Midwest whitetail. Actually, that's not even true. I didn't shoot a deer with a scope rifle until the first year we started THP. So I'd killed several deer with a rifle, but that's the one I always used. Everything was inside of 80 yards with that open sight gun. So that's the one I taught him to shoot. And yeah,
I can't quite tell. Is that a Marlin or is that a
Winchester?
Okay.
Yeah.
The lever looks a little more rounded.
Yeah, it's an old Winchester. He dropped him in his tracks, and that's a pretty comical video because I had a GoPro rolling like over our shoulder, and we both just pretty much lost it after that too. We're both fist pumping and yelling, and my eyes are the size of golf balls. It's just, yeah, I'm really happy that I've got those two hunts on video, because those are definitely my two favorite memories out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and to get it on video, to have that forever that's priceless for sure.
Yeah, my best times were when my kids were growing up and hunting with them. So
it doesn't last very long either. Like he's 13 now, and now that he's got some deer under his belt, he's already talking about wanting to go out with his buddies and go, and I'm not going to be in the picture taking him much longer. He's just going to be going,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's how I was. Once I turned 16, I still went with my dad some, but I was just mainly going by myself, or I was going with my buddies. So it doesn't, I know we'll have a few more good ones here in the next few years, but he's growing up quick. But his brother's not really interested in the hunting side yet. He likes to go tracking and he loves to fish, but he may try to shoot a deer here at some point too.
Yeah, that stuff kind of comes full circle, though. They go away for a while, but then they find their way back to where their roots in that. So, Dan, I think you'd agree with that, huh?
I don't know. Sometimes kids that are really going to be into it, they just go nuts on it right from the beginning.
Yeah,
but some do come into it later. I mean, every kid is different.
Mm-hmm.
My boys, Danny was big on hunting with me when he was young, and now he doesn't like hunting. I mean, it's not like he dislikes it. He just has no interest. It doesn't thrill him. He'd go if I'd take him on like a bear hunt or a moose hunt or something crazy or special. And James, I think early on, I pushed him a little hard. He liked hunting, and it just got to be too much, and he kind of went away for a while. Then he came back, and now he hunts pretty much. But he had that separation thing too, like Aaron was talking about, where at some point he doesn't want to be under your thumb and wants to prove himself, and then they go out with their friends and do their own thing for a while, and then usually they come back.
Sure. All right. Well, Aaron, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and start running through some of these, some of your kills here, the top 5 that you picked here for tonight. And I think we're going to start out with, actually, you know what? I think we'll wait. We were going to do that one first, but I'm going to go backwards here. We're going to go with, we're going to start out with this guy right here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's the big woods buck that me and Nick shot last fall, and that video is on the channel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys just want me to kind of walk through like in detail how we got to that spot and sort of how we harvested the buck, or is there anything that you want me to talk about at a high level first?
The most interesting thing for me is what exactly put you where you were to get that buck. I mean, did you have intel of that buck? Was it sign, or what made you pick that tree? I think that's the most intriguing thing for me.
There's a lot that went into that. I found that hunting these big sort of monotonous blocks of timber, they're mostly rolling hardwoods, oaks, hickories, a few maples in the bottoms, but they're mostly open oak hardwoods. So deer can sort of meander. I mean, they do follow terrain and you do find funnels and whatnot occasionally, but it's hard to find, legitimate trails in a lot of those situations. And this is a spot that me and one of my buddies have hunted. We haven't hunted it together at the same time, but, he might hunt it 1 week and then I might hunt it 2 weeks later or whatever. And it's a spot that we've hunted collectively probably 10, 11 times over the last 5, 6 years. And we found it just based off of reading old rubs. We got on the point of this little ridge that played out. There was no real significant terrain feature there other than it was a spot where people weren't going. We found some old rubs in there, so we started hunting it. And we would notice just in every hunt, and this is rut time frame. We don't hunt it before late October. That's the first time when we start going in there is late October. We started noticing we were seeing cruising bucks across the tip of this ridge. And it isn't a saddle, it's not a bench or anything like that. It's just a secondary ridge that kind of plays out into a creek bottom. But for whatever reason, that secondary ridge is a little bit lower than the main ridge above it. So instead of going up to the main ridge, they just pop over top of this secondary ridge when they're going from creek bottom to creek bottom. And we didn't see a lot of deer out of it. We would just be sitting for 4 or 5 hours and then a buck would cruise through there or a doe or two. But they were all coming through probably a 20, 30 yard wide swath of this ridge. And this didn't start to, like I said, this took years to put that together. This took several hunts in there during rut time to start to figure out how they move across it. And it was difficult because sometimes they'd come from one direction, sometimes they'd come from another, but they would all end up in kind of this little flat spot out on this ridge. And occasionally there'd be scrapes in there. There was always rubs in there. Sometimes big rubs, sometimes not much. But the sign varies from year to year. I just think that it's a spot that for whatever reason bucks choose to cruise through, and often during the daylight in the rut because the woods all around them are so wide open. With those ridges, it's one of the few areas where they can cruise through and get to multiple doe bedding areas without being detected. Even though the ridge itself, as you can see behind me in the picture, is not that thick. It's pretty open, but it's a secondary ridge that drops off below a main ridge. And once you kind of get back out towards the access, there's lots of deer sign out that way. So anybody that's going in there and just hunting sign usually sees that and hangs up on it. And there's bucks up there too. So you're walking by multiple other locations where there's buck sign and bucks to get back there where that spot is at. And you mentioned the tree, Dan. The tree is something that we've adapted. We've changed that multiple times. But this year we picked this particular tree because a storm or a tornado had went through there in the last 8-9 months before I killed this buck. And it had blown one of those big red oaks down right in front of the tree that I was planning to hunt. And it was obvious that the crown of that tree the trunk of that tree fell over one of the main trails that I was trying to shoot. And there was an old scrape on it too, that in my previous setup. So once that tree fell, we realized we got to get closer towards where the crown of that fallen tree is, because that's going to divert deer around it. It was a big, big tree with lots of branches. It was obvious the deer were not going over it. They were going around it. And that was new, that, that was new for this year. So when we went in there to hunt it, we had to make the adjustment and move up closer towards the cap of that ridge. And if you watch that video, you'll see I grunt this buck in after another even bigger buck comes in. He walks around the crown of that tree and into an opening at 22 yards, and I grunted to try to stop him, but couldn't stop him. Eventually, I had to run him back in again and killed him right underneath the stand. But the original opening that he walks through when I draw back on him is the opening that I was set up on to shoot. That's the trail around the crown of that tree. So it was sort of adapting to how those woods had changed a little bit versus the prior years that I'd hunted it.
So basically, to discover the spot, you found the rubs and you observed the spot from a distance.
Yeah, we were hunting close to where I ultimately killed the buck. I mean, we hung in 8 or 9 different trees on this ridge over the course of 5 years, and every time, bucks would come through the same general location, and it wasn't like a lot of them doing that. It was just noticing that occasionally. And it would have been hard to, at least for me, it would have been hard for me to just walk in there and say, this is where they're going to walk. I had to see them do that multiple times before we had a lot of confidence. And even after I shot this buck, we went out on that ridge and we scouted more around where him and the other bigger buck came from. And there was a fresh scrape up there about 30 yards away from the crown of that fallen tree. And I picked a new tree up there that I'll probably try to get in this, the next time I go back in there. But
that's interesting because, when you're telling the story, I'm thinking of some of the better spots that I've found are places that I hunt more often, like near home. And it's a place where nobody'd really look at that spot. But you either observe it from a distance and you're like, hey, something's going on over there, or something leads you to that spot, generally seeing something or bumping something. But it's kind of surprising how many times those big bucks got spots that really don't have a lot of sign, or, often you can figure out why after you find it, but you find some little funnel or something that just ain't obvious,
Yeah, well, the hunting pressure in there is obvious, and after you see bucks use this secondary ridge, you realize why they're using it. It's because these deer down here in Missouri got to survive a 2-week rifle season. Well, it's not 2 weeks. What is it? 10 days? I don't remember, but it's a rifle season in the middle of the rut. So if you get them in that open timber where all that night sign is getting laid down at, like those big rubs and scrapes and stuff up in the oaks, people can shoot them with a high-powered rifle from hundreds of yards away. Especially, these aren't real sharp ridges, a lot of them. They're rolling flats, I would say gentle hills. And people during rifle season are going to kill these things if they're walking out on those big open ridges. So as I'm going in there, the original time that I hunted it, I'm noticing these, climbing stands and scent bottles and everything else up top where all that sign is at. And I'm thinking to myself, a buck is not going to get to 3-4 years old in here if he's walking out on this big ridge in daylight. Like, they're shooting him in the middle of the rut with a rifle, because there ain't no escaping a scoped 30-06 in that wide open, hardwoods from 100 yards away. People are shooting them. But once I fell down on this ridge and saw the first few bucks use it, I was like, man, they can use that ridge and they can pop from one creek bottom to the next where does are at. And if you're on top of that ridge, you may only be 200 yards from them, but you're not going to see them down there. And I guess that was probably the main reason why we ended up there, is just reading pressure.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, remember watching that video, you guys were scouting the day before, weren't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, we scout and hunt, I don't know how many spots.
But it was particularly warm. And then you guys had a cold front come in that next morning or mid-morning.
Yeah, I actually love those warm fronts whenever it's windy and it's pushing a lot of, that southern hot air up here, because you'll have a day or two there where the wind really picks up in the middle of the day. I love just getting the wind in my face and scouting those days, or just literally still hunting. So the night before we killed him, we almost killed it. I was at full draw on a different buck, miles and miles away from there. And it was hot. I was in my t-shirt. But he had a hot doe up in the edge of a cedar thicket, and we just happened to cross him, But I tend to get luckier when I'm going into the wind on those high wind days like that scouting. So that's what we were doing before that.
Yeah, I remember that video. I remember that you had your scouting pants on and not your hunting pants, so you didn't have your grunt call with you either.
Yep, that's right. Rookie mistake.
All right, let's go ahead, and we're just going to go backwards here then from what we had originally talked about here, and we're going to go to this Iowa late October buck that you.
Yep, that's a full-blown beast tactics buck there. And I don't know if you and that hunt was on Midwest Whitetail and Chasing November in 2016. And there's a lot that went into that. I did not know about that buck. To be honest, I think only one of these bucks in my top 5 I even had a trail camera picture of. Most of the rest of them are just sort of scouting, woodsmanship, sign type of hunts. This one in particular, there's a creek that runs through there that is usually pretty high. Like you can cross it, but it can get deep. And it's most years it's up where, you got to have a set of chest waders to get across it pretty near. And for whatever reason, this year it dried out. We didn't have bad EHD or anything because it dried out late. It dried out in like late September, early October. Didn't have any rain for a couple months there at the beginning of the fall. And that creek completely dried up, almost to the point where there was very little water. And I mean, there was still a trickle running down through it and pools of water in it. But when we went in to speed scout that spot in early October, like around the 10th or 12th of October, me and Sean, who's with me in that picture, he filmed it. We were both scouting it together. We got in that creek and I was like, I'll be darned, I've never seen this creek this shallow. And then I realized pretty quickly, like, we can get down in that creek and we can scout this entire bedding area undetected virtually, because you're down in that hole, and you're just walking on wet sand essentially. So we speed scouted that whole area. I mean, all we were basically doing was cutting tracks in the creek and then following them up out and then looking for sign without, going in the middle of these bedding areas, because it's a massive bedding area all around this creek. If you pop up out of the creek and you go too far, you're going to start spooking deer. But that creek being dry allowed us to speed scout that very efficiently. And we, shortly after we started scouting, we found some really big tracks, popped up out of there and found some really big rubs. And we hunted in there and saw like 15 does and a couple small bucks. This was in like mid-October. But we climbed down out of there, and all the way back to the truck, we were like, this is going to be a key area for us in a week or two when these bucks start becoming a little more active. I didn't know enough about it to feel confident going in there, before that late October pre-rut started to really kick in, because I didn't have a lot of knowledge of the area. But we saw the big sign. We knew there was big ones in there, saw the big tracks, and then we saw a pile of does. And we realized this is the one time when we can use that creek to both read sign and access it without being detected. So it was very situational, and that was at that time we were just getting into beast tactics. Earlier that fall was the buck nest, Dan, when we, called you and we're like, holy crap, all the light bulbs just went off all at once. And we've talked about that hunt a bunch. But we had only been into the bed hunting and the beast tactics at this point for like 6-7 months. At this time, though, we're all at Midwest Whitetail, and all of us are hunting public land and just relentlessly scouting. So it's definitely a team effort that year we were just so successful as a team because as a group we had put so many miles on our boots figuring out and understanding these areas, and this is just another example of that. But anyway, we're using this creek to get in and out of there, and it's very situational. Remember, Dan, back in the day when Joe Elzinger was on the Beast forum?
Yep.
He would always talk about situational hunting tactics.
Yeah.
And as it relates to just any sort of timing with whitetails, because, you know, things are changing out there all the time. And this was a perfect example of that. Whereas in any other year I'd been there, that water would have been up and it would have thrown a wrench in things. You would have not been able to move efficiently down through that creek. But because it was dry, we were able to use that. And when we got out of there, we were like, we got to pay close attention to this. So did not hunt it again until October 30th. That morning is when we killed him. And we got some weather that came in the night before, and it was wet and windy at like 2, 3 in the morning. I woke up at 2 o'clock, and I could hear the trees blowing, and it was wet outside. I could hear the rain hitting the windows, and I just woke up, and I called Sean. I'm like, we're going back to that creek. He's like, right now? I said, yeah, we got to go now. So we got up early and went down there. Just because it's a sensitive area. You know, it's not one of those morning spots that you can get into very easily because there's so many deer in and around it. But I knew if we got to that creek, we would be in good shape. So we got in there, we walked by probably 15, 20 deer on the way in, but it was so windy and wet that very few of them even paid any attention to us. And we got in that creek, and we started just looking for fresh tracks in the creek. In the dark. This is at like 3:30 in the morning. So we just start easing up that creek, and I cut 2 or 3 sets of really big, really fresh tracks. I mean, and it just poured rain, you know, like an inch or two. And I'm reading this sign like that has been left since that rain. Sort of washed out this sand, you know, in the base of this creek. So we're like thinking, okay, these tracks are leading up into this bedding area. We know they're in there, and the bedding area ain't that dang big. So we eased up on top of the creek bank, and we went about 40 yards, found a fresh scrape. I mean, pea in it, just got hit. And straight up we went. And that's the tree that we killed him out of. We actually had 2 other nice bucks come into that scrape before he did, you know, at first light, and then about 30 minutes afterwards. It was just one of those perfect mornings. But the conditions lended itself to getting in there. If it would have been calm and crunchy, there's no way we would have made it in there without blowing a bunch of stuff up.
That sounds like a great hunt. I mean, that buck is awesome. I mean, looks like
Yeah,
it's
it
a
is.
frame, huh?
Yeah, he's definitely he's got a big rack. I don't know how old he would have been. Hard to say. But that year in particular, I was holding out for something a little bit bigger than what I normally shoot, which is not what I typically do. I'm more of an opportunist when it comes to bow hunting. If I get a nice one that comes in at 15, most of the time I'm going to shoot them. But that year I had a lot of extra time to hunt, and I passed a really nice buck 30 minutes before him that came into the scrape. I kept asking Sean over my shoulder, I'm like, you want to shoot him? You want to shoot him? He's like, yeah, I would. But he's like, I don't know if we can get switched up. So the buck ended up walking off. But this thing, it was one of those deals, Dan, where we looked at a map a week before this, and we're planning for this type of a wind in there. And I was thinking to myself, like, if I was the biggest buck in this swamp, where am I going to lay at? And I literally put an X next to this beaver slough, and that buck walked from that X.
No.
But it was a morning hunt where he was in the bedding area before daylight. So he was in the bedding area. We were right on the edge of it on a bedding area scrape. And he came out to work that scrape. And I'm betting you that he would have came out, worked that scrape, and he would have turned around and he would have went right back up in there. Or he would have ducked into another bedding area somewhere. You know, but he come, I mean, there was it's a little green strip runway that runs right along the edge of that slough bed. You can see the slough bed behind me in that picture. You see a little bit of water back there over my right shoulder.
Yeah.
He come right up the edge of that slough bed, right on that X where we thought that bedding was going to be. And I mean, he did it at about 8 o'clock. We had been sitting there for a couple hours, and we'd already had those 2 bucks come by, and Sean just said, "You better grab your bow." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "There's a huge buck coming." And I turned around the tree and I saw him coming right down. I mean, that was what we hung the stand for, was a buck coming from that spot. And, you know, it don't happen like that very often, but you only got to guess right one time a season. And he come by and I shot him at, I don't know, 7 or 8 yards. It was just perfect.
Yeah, you like to get them in real close, don't you?
I don't like shooting them past 25 yards. No. That's when things go wrong. At least for me. I mean, I don't.
No, I
don't hunt food plots and box blinds much where you got feeding deer out in front of you at a distance. Most of my stuff that I'm hunting is all tight quarters.
Yeah.
And this was no different. I mean, I couldn't shoot more than 20 yards in any direction out of this tree.
Yeah, you start getting beyond that, and like you said, in those tight quarters, there's times where you're going to miss that one branch, or you're going to kind of look through it, and that's the time that your arrow is going to deflect off of it, and disaster strikes.
Yep. Another thing with this too is, we went in there with lights blazing on this hunt in the middle of the morning because we had no idea. Like, we were going into virgin territory. We hadn't been in here before, so we're reading sign in our lights going in there. And like, we hung the stands with the lights full blown. And as it got daylight, I'm like, there's no way every deer in this bedding area did not see us up here. But they either saw us and didn't care, or they could not see us. And I found that if it's windy and wet, and as long as it ain't gray light and it's dark, if it's before gray light, I can get away with a lot when it comes to hanging those things.
I think
Even using
about that, because I think that whole headlamp thing and using red and green lights and stuff is kind of bullcrap, because I can't tell you how many times I've been walking in the swamp or whatever, and I hear something beside me, and I turn around and put a light on it, and the deer has no reaction to the light.
Yeah.
10 yards from you. It's a whole different ball game at night.
Yep. And I think it has a lot to do with the conditions. If it's loud and crunchy and you're making noise and you see a deer and your light in front of you running away, a lot of people think, well, I just spooked it because of my light.
Right.
Well, I mean, you might have spooked it because you're walking like a person through there and they heard you.
Yeah.
Or smelled you or something too. But
right.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Definitely a team effort buck there.
Yeah, that was a good video as well.
Yeah, Sean did a great job on that one. And I made a great shot, but after the fact, I waited like 5 hours because I found a piece of corn on the ground. I was like, oh no, I hit his stomach and whatever. I mean, the deer was double lunged. He was toast. But
yeah, what do you think that was about? After the fact, when you realized that it was
esophagus.
A double lung. Yeah,
I think it was just
sure.
Yeah, it was in his esophagus and just come out because it hit him through the ribs on both sides, straight double lung. He made it maybe 80 yards and fell over. The last bound I saw him take, he went into the brush and he was laying there 10 yards from it.
Yeah, you see some corn, even one kernel, and you're starting to think gut matter and
that's what I was worried about.
And then you're doubting everything, questioning everything. Yeah, it becomes a roller coaster after that.
Yep.
All right. Let me just double check here. You had one question here, and you kind of answered it. I don't think you scored this buck, but Steve questioned: Do you score your deer? Do you score deer at all? Or?
I used to measure everything, but I quit doing that in 2015, 2014. I had an experience where I'd been hunting a buck all fall, and he came in, and I thought that he was a different deer, thought he was smaller than the one I was hunting, and he got out to I let him walk off, and the deer got out like 55 yards, and I glassed him. I'm like, that's the deer I've been hunting for 2 weeks. I just let him walk because I thought, his G3s were kind of short and he wasn't going to be 150 because I was trying to kill a 150 with a bow.
Sure.
And he probably wasn't 150, but it was the buck I was there to kill. And I let him walk off because I was measuring tines. And I was just so pissed because I took a week's vacation from my job. And I climbed down after that and I went back to the house. I was so mad because I've been hunting for that opportunity so hard for weeks. And then I finally got it and I was worried about tines. So I said, I'm never doing that again. So I threw the tape away and I haven't measured anything since.
Fair enough. I'm just going to bring this question up here. It's Christopher asks, so what are some efficient strategies for big woods hill country? I start a new job and will not have any vacation time this fall. Want to make the most of my limited time. Do you have a brief answer for him? And Dan, this applies to you as well.
I would just, if you don't have any vacation time, even if maybe you've got an hour after work or, a weekend afternoon where you can get out there. I just value scouting over hunting, and especially with big woods. Like, you got to figure out how to get in and out of these areas without boogering deer. You got to figure out setups, and I like to have lots of different setups and lots of different potential locations for various wind directions. And I get all that information by walking around out there. And some scouting trips are 30 minutes and some are 8 hours. But that's what I would do, is get into the wind and spend a lot of time scouting. And people are really scared to scout during the season.
Right.
And I'm not at all. Like, if I don't have the information that I desire to have, I'm going to go and get it. Even if that means I'm like we were talking about with that buck earlier. Me and Nick were scouting like crazy the day before we killed that thing on Halloween.
Dan, what about you?
Rolling big woods hill country. I think I'd read the terrain a little bit on limited time hunts, and I'd hunt based on terrain. I think a lot of times you can just set up and stuff based on a map. Trouble is, a lot of people are doing that nowadays, so it gets harder. It depends on where you're at and how many people hunt by reading maps in that area. Some places it works really well. Some places you find tree stands everywhere you go, and you got to see more of the subtle stuff, which is where Aaron's tactic comes in a lot more handy when you need to find that subtle stuff. Nothing beats feet on the ground, but terrain has killed a lot of deer too.
Oh yeah, and I'm finding the same thing when I'm scouting. It's just, you may be. I found when we go in blind sometimes, and it depends on how steep the country is, and the makeup of the country. If you get in some of the stuff that's a little bit steeper, that's got more defined benches, or ridges or saddles or whatever, then yeah, that's deadly. But if you get in the stuff like where I killed that buck, it's like, man, you can get in the ballpark by just looking at a map and just anticipating where pressure is going to be and just reading terrain. But oftentimes it's the one thing that keeps them at 55 versus 15 or whatever. I mean, you know how bow hunting is. It's like, man, you're either one tree off this way or one tree off this way or whatever. And it's just always trying to learn something. Yeah. Like, don't expect, that's another thing. Like, you could have success the first time you go out there, but I always try to go into it and learn something every time I go. Like, that's sort of the goal. Ultimately, I'm trying to kill a buck, but if I learn something every single time I go, that snowball starts to get pretty big over time as you're hunting these spots over and over again. I'm sure that's the case with a lot of people on all different sorts of properties, whether it's public or private. I mean, that's just kind of sort of a blanket answer, but man, it seems to work.
Before we get to the next buck, I'm just going to bring up here one more question, and this is from Elizabeth, and I'm going to pull this one up here because Elizabeth was nice enough to hand out 10 memberships tonight to some of our viewers. So thank you very much for that, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Always appreciated. Elizabeth's question is, how often do you pick a spot on a map but come come up on sign, do you push on the original spot or hold up on the sign you found?
Just depends, I guess. If we're going in there blind somewhere that we don't have any prior intel, I'll sit on the sign most of the time. Especially if it's fresh and it's big sign. If I don't have confidence that there's something better, down the trail or whatever, I'm not necessarily trying to get as deep as possible every time. I mean, if the deer are telling you they're right there, especially recently, then I may sit that and try it for a hunt. Yeah. And then once I get better conditions for scouting, that's another thing that I should mention that kind of pertains to the last question is in big woods, if it's calm and crunchy, I don't like covering a ton of ground and spooking the crap out of everything. But if I have good conditions to scout, then I will use those to my advantage to try to gain as much information as possible.
Dan?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Aaron on that. I do, to me, I think it's kind of a wide open question, and you got to weigh out where the sign is, and if it looks like it's coming out of bedding or it's travel corridor or if it's rut. For me, most of the time, I'm going to try and follow that sign. It might deter where I'm going, but I'm not walking past fresh sign that I think is being used in daylight. Never. I can always hunt that transition or that edge or that bedding area I'm going to another day, but I'm not going to walk through something that looks hot and burn it out to hunt something I don't know what I'm getting into, that I'm guessing or pre-scouted.
That just look good on a map, right? Yeah.
Right.
Same.
Very good. All right, Aaron, shall we move on? In fact, sure. I actually skipped over one here before, and we have the decoy buck. And I know you've used the decoy multiple times in that, but this is one of the ones that you said was one of your favorites here. And does this one go back to Midwest Whitetails as well, or is this? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yep. We actually killed this one. I think it was about 80 to 100 yards from the Smurf.
Okay.
Very, very close. So in this public area, people are parking at the lot there, and they're walking in down these mowed paths, and they're hitting this creek bottom, and they're ending up way back up in those woods and stuff. And we'd been beating our heads against the wall for the first part of the rut and hadn't had much luck. So we decided to sleep in one morning, me and Zach, and we just started driving around spots just to sort of gauge pressure, see if we could find a spot where there was no vehicles. And we pulled into this road and drove down to this little parking lot, and there was nobody there. And it had rained like 4 or 5 days ago. It's a mud road going in there. And there was no tire tracks down it in like 3 or 4 days, since that last rain that we could see. There was no boot tracks either. So we parked at the lot, and I'm getting in the back of the car to grab my bow. And all of a sudden Zach goes, "Buck right there." And I look out in front of the car, and there's a giant buck running a doe across that grass field that you can see behind that deer.
Sure.
Ended up being 3 bucks, 2 shooters for sure. And they both ran the doe off. Me and Zach were on the ground we just hunted from the ground the rest of the day, and we're trying to get in tight to them because they were running that hot doe all around that field. We had a pretty crazy day, saw a pile of bucks and a pile of does and whatnot. But anyway, we didn't kill anything that day, and we got back to the car and slipped out of there, and we came up with a plan to hunt it the following day. So it was like we found the rut X, if you will, where there was at least 1 or 2 hot does.
Yeah.
And we left that night. And I should preface by saying I'd scouted a little bit of this area before, and I had a trail camera running in there all fall that I had checked a couple of times. And it had 2 or 3 big bucks on it, including this deer. This buck was on it, and he was the biggest body deer out of all of them by a mile. He was on that camera 3 or 4 times on a trail crossing at 2 a.m. And that trail crossing is right behind Zach's head right there, back in the edge of those woods. He was never there in daylight. This was all through October. I don't know where he was bedding at. But anyway, I just knew there was big bucks in the area, so we went by there and just happened to see a bunch of them with that doe. So we left that night, and we were thinking about how are we going to get in there. And these conditions the following morning were completely opposite of the swamp buck that we just talked about. The conditions were hot and they were calm, and it was middle of the rut. It was like lows in the mid 60s with possible tornado warnings later that day. So it was really unseasonably warm, and it was dead calm. And we're like, how are we going to get across this noisy grass field, into those trees on the opposite side when they're literally rutting in the field? Like, if we go across that thing in the dark, we're going to blow everything out of it. And that's probably what the first guy's going to do that comes in here and hunts us. And the day before that, we found a tree in this little skinny fence row with an old waterway that ran underneath it. And there was a couple trails underneath that. It's a spot in that brushy field where the grass was just a little bit shorter. And on the edge of that waterway was a slight little berm, almost a little rise. There wasn't but about a foot or two elevation difference in the rest of the field. But we thought when we were back at the house, we were like, man, if we brought the decoy in there, we could climb that tree and we could see that whole field. And that decoy, we could put it on that little berm where it's visible to most of that field. And we could go in, get in there for a morning hunt. We'd only have to go, 80 to 100 yards from that parking lot. So our impact would be pretty minimal. We were basically going to do that. We were going to hang an observation set to watch that whole field and then make a move from there. But we decided to bring the decoy in the event that several bucks did what they did yesterday and got out in there with a doe. Maybe we could grunt one of them off of her. The thing with calling, though, is if you ain't in the right situation to call them to you with no decoy, you guys know oftentimes they're going to come in, they're going to hang up because they don't see the deer.
Or they're going to circle downwind.
Or they're going to circle downwind.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, we're like, man, we could definitely call to these bucks, but they're never going to come over here because they're just going to look over here and not see a buck.
Yeah.
So, and after we killed this deer, I got a lot of people, especially on the Beast Forum, that were like, how in the hell do y'all kill a buck like that on public land with a decoy 100 yards from the parking lot? It's like, nobody does that. It's like, you guys got to understand, it's a situational tactic. We're not just going out there and throwing decoys up whenever
Right.
we want. It's just, in this particular instance, it was like, it made sense to bring it in and to put it up. Well, we climbed that tree in the dark. We've been sitting there for about 4 hours, and we did not see a single deer until 10 a.m. And at 10 a.m., we looked across that field, way across it, and here come a doe just easing up out of that creek bottom, and he was behind her. And when he walked out there, I wasn't real sure about shooting him, but Zach was like, dude, that's that big giant bodied buck that's been on the camera, And I'm like, no, he's not. He's not nearly that big. And we were kind of arguing about it. We were watching this deer through the binoculars with the doe. And we watched him for probably 15, 20 minutes. He just slowly eased that doe out in the middle of that field. And then the doe disappeared. I don't know if she laid down or what, but he was just standing there. He just, how these old bucks, sometimes they will just stand in a spot and they will just survey the situation. They're not like the rest of the deer where they're trying to move around everywhere and get from A to B. They just have so much more patience. Mm-hmm. He just stood there for the longest time. He just is, relaxed, looking around the field, not moving an inch. If you'd have walked down there, you'd have probably never even seen him. He was just standing there in that thick brush. And I grunted at him one time. I grunted loud to get his attention because he was 200 or 300 yards away. I grunted loud one time, and he snapped that head over there, and he looked our direction. And I put the call up. And I bet you it took him close to 20 minutes before he finally decided to investigate the source of that sound. He looked and looked and looked for the longest time, and then he'd look back at where that doe was, and then he'd look back at where that call came from, and he did that over and over and over again. And finally, he went over closer to where we last saw the doe, and he started rubbing some little saplings out there, started pawing the ground, and then he made a few circles out there. Like he did not come straight to us. He started like getting revved up, and it was almost like he was torn. He's like, I want to go run that intruder off that's over in that fence row, but I also have a doe out here and I don't want to leave her. But the grass is so thick he couldn't find her. He wasn't like frantically looking, but he just kept, it was clear that he was torn. He was looking both ways. And finally, after almost a half an hour, I felt like he turned and he started walking towards us. And at one point in the video, you can see him stop out there and look hard right at the decoy. And he's like 100, 150 yards away. And from that point forward, he was locked. I mean, he forgot everything. He dropped his guard completely, locked those ears back. And I mean, it sucked him straight to it. And I shot him at 20 yards. I mean, he had no idea we were in the world. He was so focused on that decoy. And that, like I said, he didn't see the decoy for 20, 30 minutes after I'd made the initial sound. But it 1000% sealed the deal on him, where if we wouldn't have had it, he would have stood out there in that field and looked at that fence row and looked and turned around and went to that doe. I'm almost guarantee it.
Yeah, like you said, it's pretty tough to pull them, especially when they're wide out in the open like that. If they don't see another deer, I've had instances like that. And luckily, where I've tried it without a decoy, and luckily it's called in another smaller buck, and the buck that was coming out finally, when the other buck was far more interested, came into view, then the mature buck made his move and started moving in, and ended up just running the other one off. But yeah, like you said, those older bucks like that are pretty smart, and they're not going to expel a bunch of extra energy for no reason at all, you know.
Well, once you fool them, though, they have so much confidence in what they're doing. They're going. That's what we noticed with the decoys. It's like if you use them in the right situation with the right calling tactics, the right setups, once a big one believes it's a buck, you have him. Like he is going to that thing to kill it. I mean, there's no doubt. He had zero, he dropped his guard completely. He was not nervous whatsoever going into that thing.
Sure.
He didn't try to get downwind of it or anything. He was coming in there to run him over when I shot him.
Incredible bases on that thing. I'm just, from looking at that picture.
Oh, I mean, it's the biggest deer I've ever shot.
All the way through.
It's like, Dan, what is that one that you call? Is it the 400-pound slob?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my. I mean, he ain't that big, but that's my biggest bodied buck that I've ever shot. I mean, that's what all the guys said when they walked up to him. It's like, good grief, that thing's a steer.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought his rack was small when he walked out. It's because his body was so huge. Once we got up to him, we're like, holy crap, this thing's a big buck. Like, he's a big, heavy rack deer. That's probably the biggest bodied and oldest buck I've ever shot.
If you take your hand and you cover the deer, so just the rack sticking up, you can see how big that rack is.
Mm-hmm.
But with the deer in there, you're right. At first glance, it doesn't look that big. When you start looking at the bases, or if you cover the deer, you can see how huge that rack is.
Exactly.
He was heavy. And like I said, had pictures of him. That's the only one of these 5 that I ever had any trail camera pictures of, but he was never there in daylight. It was just, I think we hit it at the right time where people hadn't been in there for a few days and several bucks had moved a hot doe or two into that field to, rut. And we just happened to get lucky. 100 yards.
Yeah.
Yep. Familiar, isn't it?
Like a slop buck.
Yep. Familiar.
Yeah, exactly. I like a week or two ago, I did a little gathering up at Black River Falls and let the public come to it, and we went and looked at the spot where the bear bait buck was.
Yeah.
And there was one guy that was talking to me about big woods who just kept saying, I couldn't hunt here. What made you hunt here? I'm like, because the buck was here. You got to hunt them where they're at, But he was just so fixated on you have to be in the middle of the woods, And I think a lot of hunters have that issue, where they're just fixated on you have to get away from everybody. You have to get as far away as possible. And really, those big ones just seem to show up anywhere, and you got to hunt them where they're at.
I agree completely. And that's the thing. I mean, on all these hunts, we're talking a lot about reading pressure and reading people. I mean, it's the same thing that you've said for I don't know how long, Dan, where it's like I take a property and I look at where do people go and where do they not go. And one thing that you said years ago that has always stuck with me, and I don't know how many people I've told this to, 200 yards is a long way to a bedded deer. So when people hear that, they're like, when they hear the first statement of you got to hunt where people aren't, they're like, well, that means I got to go 2 miles back there and I got to get away from everybody. Well, yes and no, because 200 yards is a long way to a bedded deer. You know, you could be walking past a deer that's bedded 200 yards from the parking lot, but if everybody's going down this path and nobody's going into these woods right here, this thicket, he never encounters any hunters. He may hear hear them getting out of their trucks and hear them talking and walking up and down that road and their deer carts clanking around or whatever. And he may smell boot tracks on that thing all the time in the middle of the night, but he's not going there during daylight because that's where you guys are.
Yeah.
And that I have found that to be true many, many times. It's like you don't have to be very far away from people. I mean, they're not going to be right on top of where the people are. They're going to find ways to detour around that. But
Sure.
You don't have to be very far from them to find little holes like that where they feel comfortable spending time.
Right. And in that particular spot where you were at, I could just see everybody crossing that whole grass field thinking they got to get out to the timber.
Yeah, there's a mowed path cutting across it. That's off to the left of the camera. Well,
Really?
What do you think they do? They park at that lot and they all just send it into those woods down that mowed path. That field is chest and neck high with thick crap. So they look at that and they're like, well, I can't get an arrow through that stuff. So, and I don't want to, why would I go walking through the middle of that field when I could just go up this mowed path road and get back to some of these nice trees where I can hang a stand in,
Yeah.
So they don't even look at that big grass field, even though there's deer literally laying in it within 100 or 200 yards of that lot.
Yeah.
They're just observing you coming in and out of there.
All right. We're going to move on to buck number 4. And I'm going to say this one was probably one of my favorite videos from you guys. And that's the bump and dump buck. This was just, I don't know. This one just sticks with me. It's just the way the whole thing played out and all the way through to the ending. I won't get into it too much because I want you to go ahead and tell the story and kind of explain the tactics and thought process you had on this one here.
Team effort buck, another one of those. As some of you know, we hunt together as a group fairly often. So I would not have been able to get on this thing had I not got some intel from Jake. He was driving down that road a few nights before that and had a giant buck run in front of his car. And he went into this block of timber that is otherwise very inconspicuous looking block of public woods. It's not very big. There's not very many thickets in it. There ain't very many deer in it. And it's just open hardwoods. There's nothing that would stick out on a map, really, that would say that there's a lot of deer in there. It's just a spot that I feel like was overlooked. When you look at a map of this area, you find lots of good looking stuff that looks like bedding areas. It looks like funnels and all that. And that's where everybody goes. But because he saw a big deer move into this little oak patch, me and Gooch were like, let's just go in there. It was another one of those speed scouting days where it was 70 degrees, middle of October, hot, windy. We got into the wind and we just started working them ridges back there. And what I like to do in rolling hills is I like to pop ridges slowly when I'm scouting or still hunting. Like try to grab some cover as you're coming to the cap of the ridge because that's where you're most exposed. I try to grab some cover, wait for wind gusts, and kind of ease over the top of the ridge and then glass across the next drainage in the face of the opposite ridge. I like to hit that for several minutes before I take another step. And once I clear all that with my eyes, Then I'll drop down. I'll move pretty fast. I'll drop down the ridge, go through the drainage, and then back up the other side. And then I slow way down again when I get to that next crest. You know how a lot of these main ridges they'll have a half a dozen secondary ridges pouring off the side of them. Every one of them have drainages in them. Well, I don't like going down that main ridge. I want to go down the middle of each one of them secondaries and just pop. I want to pop over, glass, everything below and everything across. Once I clear it, down and through, and do that again. And I think we were on our third ridge back in there, starting to get back in there where you felt like, if one's going to be laying in here, this is where he's going to be. And I popped over top of this ridge. The wind's howling, and I checked the face across from me, and I checked the drain right below me, and I did not see anything. And then I took 2 steps, and this buck blew up right below me, 15 yards away. He was around the back of a big red oak, and I never saw him. He was just laying there at the head of a ditch. On the upper third, you know how that they are in hill country, Dan, where those ditches start right about where the upper third of the ridge is, and there's always trails that lead around the head of those ditches.
Yep.
And he was bedded right there. I mean, there was no other. He was just a little flat spot next to a big red oak tree. There was no other piece of cover or anything. But we were going into the wind. He did not smell us. He just heard us walking or having to catch us moving out of the corner of his eye or something. We were so close to him that we surprised the hell out of him. And he just took off and ran across that ditch and stopped like 60 yards away. And I immediately said to Gooch, I'm like, he doesn't know what we are. Again, you can see in the video, like he's moving his head back and forth. The wind is freaking him out. He's looking all around. And we watched him for a minute or two. And I was like, Gooch, he can't smell us. There's no way. The wind is in my face the whole time. And he eventually gives up on it and trots off. And then we bail out of there. But all the way back to the truck, we're like, man, that deer did not know what just happened. He did not get us. He didn't smell us. He didn't hit our ground scent. Nothing. We just startled him. And I have found, man, when you're going into that high wind like that and everything in the woods is moving and you startle deer in front of you, they do not behave the same way as one that smells you in a setup or something like that. You startle them in their bed. And they jump up and they're like, I mean, think about if you have one of your kids or something come in there and wake you up in the middle of the night, like go to shaking on you or whatever, and like you pop up out of bed. It may take you a few seconds for you to get your bearings, right, to figure out what the heck's going on. You just been laying there relaxed. You were startled. And that's exactly how he acted. So we leave that area, and immediately I'm starting to think about, where is he going to be the next day? And we go from a warm front with 25 mile an hour south winds. Overnight, wind switches to the northwest, 30 mile an hour northwest, 20-degree temperature drop. This is mid-October, October 14th or 15th, the very next day. So I'm thinking hill country bedding, because that's kind of the situation that he's in. I'm thinking, okay, yesterday he was on this north-facing ditch, at the top of it, at this upper third of this ridge. But today he's got completely different conditions, and we just bumped him off of that. Like, where's the next likely place within the 300-400 yard circle of where he's going to be? And we narrowed it down to the edge of that water right there. I could see on an aerial photo there was a little grove of willow trees at the edge of that bank behind me in the picture that were at the base of one of those ditches. And I was like, man, it is so windy this morning. They're not going to be up towards the top of those ridges. It's just going to be too loud. They can get down in the bottom of that hole, and he could be up underneath those willow trees where he's got, wind swirling to him from all directions. Because we see them bed like that often. It's like depending on the conditions. Sure. If it's a pretty high wind day, they'll get all the way down in the bottom of that bowl, where they are just really difficult. Like if you come over the ridge, they can see you in all directions. It's like stadium seating, and they're on the 50-yard line looking around you. They can see everybody in the stadium basically, and they can smell everything around them. because the wind is just swirling and pulling and pushing down through there. So we chose a ridge right above that, about 80 yards away, as close as we could get. And we slipped in there in the dark, climbed up, wind is howling, it's getting daylight, and we did not see anything for the first hour and a half. And then I was looking down in that hole. I was set up staring at those willow trees the whole time. Because as you said before, Dan, you got to go in there with the confidence that he's there. Even though 9 times out of 10, he probably isn't. You have to have the confidence in your mind that he is in that spot. Like, all you have to do is be right once. But if you don't have that confidence, you're going to make a ton of mistakes. Mm-hmm. So I was glued on that freaking spot. I mean, like, he is going to emerge out of there at any point. And I'll be damned if I didn't look at the gooch and look back and he was standing there. Like, I'd been looking at that spot for 2 hours. Didn't see anything. And then, boom, there he is. And I knew without hardly even looking at him, it was the same deer through the binoculars, It's like, Gooch, it's a big buck. And I was like, he's got split points on that one side. And he said, I bet it's the same one. I bet it's the same one. And I started looking at him, and he's filming him. I'm like, dude, it's the exact same one that we bumped. He's just shifted over here on this south-facing stuff for this north wind. And we watched that thing forever, as you could see in the video.
Right.
I mean, I blew the guts out of that grunt call trying to get his attention. And I honestly don't think he could even hear it.
Yeah, it was one of those where, you never want to overcall in that, but with how high those winds were and how much the leaves were rustling, like you said, you were blowing the hell out of that thing trying to get some sort of reaction. Cause I think if I remember correctly, you guys were kind of back and forth, like, didn't hear it, still didn't hear it, doesn't hear it.
I ain't so sure he ever heard it.
Yeah.
It's either that or he was just hearing it out of the side of his ear and just did not even pay attention. I've never had one of them do that before, where you were grunting that loud and they didn't at least like look your direction.
Right.
He either didn't care or he didn't hear it. I mean, the wind was just absolutely howling, but we were in a situation on top of that ridge looking into the bowl where we had a consistent wind. It was coming straight down the ridge. And we kept thinking about trying to get down and stalk him because the wind was so high. It's like, man, we can get away with a lot of movement here. But I knew how the wind behaved in those hills. When you get in the bottom of those holes, I mean, you guys know, it's like Swirl City down there.
Yeah.
And he's at the very bottom. And I just had no confidence that we'd be able to get down there and get within bow range without him boogering us, because he's doing like big bucks do. He's just it's mid-October. He's browsing on stuff. He's occasionally rubbing a sapling, but I mean, he moved all of 15 yards in 40 minutes. He's going nowhere fast. He's going to browse around and probably lay back down in that same hole or somewhere close. So we just watched him. And finally my patience wore out. And I was like, Gooch, we got to try to make something happen. We got to try to get down and get closer to him. Even if we blow it, we got to try to make something happen. You just don't. And it's the only deer we've seen all morning. It's the only deer we saw the day before when we bumped him out of there. So it's just mano a mano in there. So we decided to start climbing down out of that thing, out of the set. And about halfway down the tree, Gooch is going down with the camera, and I look out there, and that buck is coming up the side of the ridge. He ain't coming to us. He's hooking our downwind side. What he was doing was following that transition of the timber around the edge of that water, where he could. I mean, it's not much of a transition at all. Most people wouldn't even think of it as one, but it's 100% transition from sand beach to oaks. And he was going right on the inside of those oaks, working right up the transition, eating acorns. The problem was he was about to get downwind of us. And, he's moving slow, but he's headed for the point of this ridge, and our wind is blowing right to it. So I'm like frantically getting our stuff down, and this buck is 55 yards away. Yeah. I mean, all he has to do is look over there, and he can see these two dudes like scrambling to get out of this little tree that we're in.
Fireman coming down the pole.
Yeah. I mean, so anytime he walks behind a tree and he's munching on stuff, that's sort of the one silver lining is when you get a big one like that time of the year and they're confident in their spot, they're not moving very far, very fast most of the time. And he would stand behind a tree and just munch on acorns for several minutes. And that would allow us to make the moves that we needed to get on the ground. Because I knew we wasn't going to kill him out of the tree. He was going to smell us. I've done that too many times where I just said, well, I'll just wait it out. Nah, I mean, two stinking dudes in a tree, they get 50, 60 yards downwind of you, and those big boys smell you, and they ain't coming back.
Right.
So that was the option. It was like, we got to get down. We cannot get smelled. So we got down. Somehow he didn't spook, and we just made a loop in the woods. It was so windy that we got away with everything. I mean, we were full-blown jogging through the woods on the back of that ridge. Deer's only 80 yards from us, but it was so windy. It's like he couldn't hear us blowing that grunt tube as hard as we possibly could. Ain't no way he's going to hear us walking through these leaves. And we got up there, got close to the crest of the ridge, the direction he was headed. I saw some horizontal cover in front of me where a down tree had been. I'm like, Gooch, let's get to that. That's the spot. We got to get right there and get right in front of that blowdown. And then when he comes over that ridge, we'll have all this good back cover. And we got up there, and I mean, I got in front of that blowdown, grabbed my bow, and stood up and started looking, and here come the tines over the ridge. Like, we could not have got there any 2-3 seconds later, and he would have boogered. But we got there, and we were still, and we were in a good spot, just standing up on the ground. But we had all that back cover and all that wind, and he is convinced he's got it figured out in there. So in the footage, you just see him walk right up to 15 yards where I eventually shoot him. He had but it looks, when you watch the video, people were like, man, how do you get away with being that open and exposed? You don't see the view from the deer. The view from the deer is looking at two giant brush piles, essentially, that are right behind us.
Sure.
With all this horizontal limbs and stuff. We're not just two dudes standing out in the middle of wide open woods. We've got all that back cover that he was looking into. That's why I wanted to get in front of it. And it was a very aggressive move in that last 30 yards because we were getting close to him. We're like, man, he's got to be 50 yards. He's just right over the crest. But if we're back here, we don't have any cover. We're not going to be able to move on him. Should he come up there, he's going to be stuck at 50, and we're going to be SOL. So we just sent it to that spot as quickly as we could. Did not care about making noise. We're like, that's the spot we got to be to kill him. And we got there right before he did.
I mean, the whole move was aggressive. The decision to get down. I just remember watching, and I've watched that one multiple times, and judging by some of the comments here, it also seems to be one of the favorites here in the comments section as well. I feel like there's a lot of hunters that would absolutely freeze up in that situation and just hope for the best that buck isn't going to get downwind. But for you and Gooch to both have to get down out of that stand and make a move like that is pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know, like,
I'm one of those guys though. Like, I had been that guy.
Sure.
Like 2 or 3 times. That's why I got down though.
Were you successful on all those times?
No, I spooked the deer all those times before that. Like,
right. So
I'd already read this book before, and I've read this book of Hard Knocks, and that's just the one thing that I'm trying to keep from happening. I do not want him to smell me.
Oh, sure.
He can't. If he goes 60 yards and cups around me and smells me, then we might as well just pack it up and go somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tomorrow won't work.
What's that, Dan?
Yeah, he gets downwind and smells you. Tomorrow ain't even going to work.
Right.
No.
So that's your chance. That is when Scott was saying, hey, most guys are just sitting in the tree and hope that the buck turns and comes away. I think he's right, but most people don't kill the buck.
It's true.
The guys who kill the bucks are the guys who make aggressive moves, who make it happen, who, I'm the kind of guy where I get all set up in a tree. I'll sneak up the tree, and from a vantage of in the tree, I'll look down and say, wait a second, that tree over there, 20 yards, has a better advantage. I'll pull everything down and move. Even at last minute, I'll be sneaking to do it as fast as I can because I got limited time or whatever.
Yeah.
But if that's where I got to be, that's where I got to be, and I'm moving,
That's the X.
Yeah. And I think, whenever we talk to people who are great hunters, it's the same story. Nobody else would do it, but they're aggressive. They got that that attitude where they're going to do whatever it takes.
That's the X you got to be on. That's
Yeah.
another common theme with these hunts is like and like you said earlier, I like to have them close. I want to be taking 25 and in if I can. And I can't tell you, yes, we killed this buck and it worked out, but I have messed it up. You know, I've messed up 4 or 5 of them for every one of them like this. So I've seen that, you know, the tactics start to work and things start to make sense and you start to have more encounters and you start to see more big bucks. But that's like, you have to take a step past that because you can see them, you can put yourself in a good spot, but you're often going to be just this close to getting them and they're going to get away. And that's the difference maker that
Sure.
Dan just said is like that last 20 yards or that tree over there or whatever. That's the difference in watching them and killing them. And if you find yourself in that situation where you've got to pick one or the other, I used to be super conservative in those guys that would sit back and just basically let the deer eventually hope for the best, but the deer usually figured me out. It didn't work.
Yeah.
So now I'm more aggressive. I'm like, I got to be at that spot to kill him. If I spook him, then forget it. I'll move on to the next one. But I got to be at that X.
Yeah. I mean, I think Dan hit it on the head too. Like if you're going to be that guy, you have to overcome that mental barrier because I think part of it's a mental barrier too. You have to climb over that wall and be willing to make those mistakes, and it may work out, it may not work out, and be okay with that and not be hung up on that. Like, I'm never going to do that again. Like, I totally screwed that up. Maybe if I would have just stayed in my tree, and you know, you can think about lots of different examples here, but this one in particular, yeah, I think that's next level, and that's kind of what sets you apart and Dan apart from your average hunter out there, where I think they're just going to kind of freeze up a little bit, or just have that panic mode. Like they maybe want to do it, but they're so afraid of screwing it up that they're not going to take that chance, I guess. So very impressive indeed.
Some people learn from their mistakes, or let's say they learn from their failures. Not necessarily, it's never really a mistake. I mean,
Right.
You're learning as you go, but you learn from your failures. And if you just keep doing the same thing out of fear, you should probably just take up golf. You know, really,
Yeah.
using that failure to your advantage is really what separates, failure from success.
Sure. I agree. Well, why don't you go ahead? I know I kind of interrupted you there because I thought, that was right in that moment there. And it's a really important part of that hunt is making that decision to get down and get super aggressive with it. But why don't you go ahead and finish up? And
yeah, so I shot the deer 15 yards. I hit a twig in between me and the buck, and the arrow only went in about 10 or 12 inches. So I was immediately nervous. I could see that it hit him in the ball of the shoulder. He was quartering to me a little bit too. So the buck runs off. I'm losing it. Me and Gooch are over there just about to pass out. And I just was very unsure of the shot because you all have heard horror stories or been a part of those where you hit them in the ball and socket of the shoulder, where the humerus meets the scapula. And that's like the thickest part in the front of that deer other than his skull. And I hit that spot and I was like, man, I don't know if I got that thing. So he ran off. We went back to looking at footage. I called Ranch Fairy and Shane Simpson and a bunch of the other guys in the dog tracker world, and we're showing them the video, and I'm melting down my nerves because I really want to get this thing, obviously.
yeah.
Ended up getting a tracking dog out there, and we went right to the deer. He made it 70 yards. I mean, the broadhead completely split his humerus ball in half, and his leg was just severed, folded up. I mean, you could just fold it completely up over his body. And that broadhead went clear through, took off the front of his heart, and he was toast. So, I mean, it was all that worrying for nothing, basically. It was a good shot. It hit him. It got in there and got everything that you would want it to happen. But I know that a lot of people have seen the opposite occur with those types of hits. but we got him, and we celebrated as a team. I'm the one in the picture with the buck there, but it was a team effort for sure.
Yeah,
Like
you
I
had a
said,
whole
that
crew.
there's a whole crew that goes into figuring out these spots, and like I would have never went in there had Jake not saw that buck.
Magnificent buck. I mean, you look at those G2s and G3s on that right side. It's just incredible.
We were pretty stoked.
All right. Let's go ahead and Dan, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that at all, or any other questions you had?
The only thing I was going to say is you're talking about the whole team there and it being a team event. I remember the hunting challenges that we did, particularly Minnesota and Michigan, probably because those were the early ones. But when the bucks were shot, I mean, you guys are like, don't go in. We all want to go in as a team. We all want to go in this group because that was fun. It was everybody's fun, just go in there and enjoy it, It was that whole team atmosphere is pretty cool, which is different from me because I'm usually solo, the lone wolf kind of guy out there by myself way back in, but it was really cool to see that, that whole group mentality that you guys got going on. You got a really good group you put together there.
Thanks. I'm very lucky. They're a great group of guys, and I'm just lucky to be a part of it. But I just love learning. Like anytime somebody shoots a buck, gets it down in camp, I want to go out there not to steal their spot or anything, but I want to know the details that we're talking about here. I'm asking them the same questions. Like, why'd you set up? I mean, you remember, Dan, when me and Ted were with you guys till 5 a.m. or whatever it was. It's like, why'd y'all go here? What'd you see from here? And all that. That stuff just fires me up.
That's the thing too. When we're talking about like, what's the difference between guys who are successful and guys who are not? We always want to know why. You get other guys out there like, let's just get the buck and get out of here.
Yeah.
That's not me or you. It's like, why did this happen? Hold on a second. We can drag till 2 a.m. if we have to, but let's see why this happened. You got to know,
Yeah, it might help you kill a buck in 2 or 3 years or 10. Who knows? But you might get a little nugget. That's the thing. You're always picking up little nuggets of information here or there that help you down the road.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to buck number 5, our last one here of the evening. And this is your Georgia mountain buck.
This is my biggest buck. And I know that flies in the face of what everybody's seen on these pictures thus far, but it is. For the size of this deer in the area that he's in, this was a giant buck. I don't know the record on this 20,000 some acre piece of public land. Like they measure them all that come in. And the record is like this size, like mid 130s type buck. Oh. And I talked to a few of the killers down there that have shot some big ones in the past, and they're about that same size and not very dang many of them. And I'm telling you, when we got down there after the first 2 or 3 days of scouting, I felt like it was going to be a feat just to shoot a deer. Like to see a deer, that would be tremendous. To shoot a deer, I don't care if it's a doe fawn. It was going to be a feat in itself because it was difficult country to decipher for me. And the deer density, it was fairly high, I guess, for Georgia, but it was just, they seemed like they were really spread out all over the place. There was very few patternable things that I could see when I was scouting. It just was a difficult hunt. And I didn't have high expectations going into it. Surprisingly, there was very little hunting pressure. I saw the least amount of hunting pressure down there that I saw probably all year that year. And it was during their post rut. I think it would have been early December time frame. And it was just, man, I mean, we were on a 6-day hunt and we spent all day, every day, just hiking, walking, scouting, very little sitting because we didn't even know what to set up on. And as you can see, we were hunting with a muzzleloader, which if I'd have had a bow, I would have really felt, like I was at a disadvantage, because we weren't even in the ballpark. And usually within a day or two as a group, I feel like we're starting to figure some things out. But after day 2 down there, I'm talking, we had found like one pile of deer poop in a handful of tracks, maybe. We'd seen one doe and a fawn that we spooked off the tip of a ridge. There was just so little sign and so little deer sightings. It's all timber. There was nowhere that you could really observe. So, I mean, I'm going into all these different challenges surrounding this hunt, but that's why the buck means so much to me. Is we finally found a spot where, as we were scouting, we saw a little doe out on the tip of one of those ridges. And on the last hunt, I was using the example of peak and ridges, where you get on those secondaries and you just climb over top, you peak, you glass, you go. Yeah. We were doing that all day, every day, because this is hill country. And we peaked a ridge and we saw a doe on the opposite ridge. This is middle of the day. We're just scout hunting. She moves off. We creep over there. We set up, hunt that spot the rest of the day. We found a couple piles of deer poop on the ground, maybe one old rub. Didn't see another deer that day. We climbed back out of there and left, and we got to thinking, like, what's deeper in there? It looked like she was up in some of that mountain laurel that got a little thicker on the side of that big hill. And I got to looking at a topo map. I was like, man, it is really steep back there. Really steep. So we need to go in there tomorrow and see what that looks like. So we bailed off the side of this mountain. I mean, steep. And we got way down in the bottom of that hole, and I'm looking up at this mountain the following morning, and I'm like, there is no way somebody's dragging a deer up out of here. There is no way. It is straight up. I mean, it was a chore just to get us up and out of there.
Yeah.
So, and we didn't see any deer. We saw a few rubs, but we were stage hunting in there, Dan. We basically hunted around one edge, saw the doe, then we swooped around to the complete opposite side of it, came in from a different direction, saw some sign, saw how steep the ridge was, but we left the meat of that spot alone. We hadn't went in there yet. We had 2 or 3 ridges full of mountain laurel in between the 2 setups that we hadn't been on. And we're like, man, that feels like the X down here, because it's really steep and hard to get into. It wasn't that far from the road. It was just extremely steep. So we climbed up out of there, and we went up to the public land, building up there where they keep their equipment to manage the property. And we got to talking to one of the guys up there, and I asked him, I had one question in mind. And I said, out of all the deer, because you got to check them in, out of all the deer that you guys have checked, have you ever had a deer come in a pack? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, have you ever had a deer quartered up come in a pack? It's like, no, every deer we've ever checked in has came in whole. I'm like, whole bodied, like they drug it out with a cart or with their hands? And he's like, yes. I said, fair enough. I'll see you guys later. And that was it. It was on. We were like, okay, we have found the spot on this place where nobody has been, maybe for several years. So we bailed off in there, and I shot a 2-year-old buck the first morning, was peaking ridges, and I got to the top of a ridge and was doing some blind grunting, and I looked out in front of me, and here he come up out of there, and I thought it was, at this point I hadn't seen a deer in days, and I'm like, it's a unicorn. They do exist down here. So anyway, 2-year-old buck comes in, and I blast him at 15 yards. Me and Gooch go nuts, and you killed 2 bucks down there, 1 per day. So I got that buck, and I was so stoked. I mean, it's a little like 90-pound deer with a kind of a hat rack buck, but I was so pumped because the plan worked, right? We asked them, and figured out the spot where nobody was going, and eventually hunted it down and got a buck. So we were stoked. So we pack him up out of there, and we're celebrating with Greg back at camp. And we're like, we got one more day to hunt, boys. What do y'all want to do? And we're like, man, we got one more ridge back there we haven't hunted that's deeper in than where we just shot this thing. And like, we shot him, dropped him, put him in a pack, and got out of there. It was very low impact. So the next morning we did the same thing. We dove into that spot and we went to the middle of it, got in there deep. And we were doing the same thing, peaking ridges, mid-morning. And we were in the middle of walking across the top of one of those secondary ridges, and these deer take off bolting out of the mountain laurel above us. They're not spooked. They're chasing a doe. End up being 3 bucks in a doe. We ain't seen 3 bucks a whole trip. I'm talking day 5 or 6, and we've hunted daylight to dark every day. We ain't seen 3 the whole trip. We've seen 1. And there's 3 bucks. And the second buck that came out was like a 100-inch 8-pointer. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a state record, you know. I mean, this thing's running out behind this doe, and I'm trying to get on him and get a shot. All of a sudden, I hear a grunt, and I turn to my right, and I see this deer come out of the laurel. Mm. And that buck's body, you know, that slob buck we talked about a while ago, that buck is less than half the size of that buck, that slob buck on the hoof. I mean, he's a 130-pound deer. Maybe.
Wow.
So when you put a 135 or 140-inch rack on a 130-pound deer, it looks like he's like a mega giant. So as soon as this thing runs out of there, we're all losing it. We're like, oh my gosh, that's an absolute monster. Because it's all relative, right? We talked about the big buck body a while ago, making the antlers look small. Totally different scenario when you have a tiny body deer with a decent big size rack on it. I mean, he looks absolutely enormous. So we see this thing run out on this ridge, and he stops with this doe like 150 yards away, and I'm desperately trying to get a shot and can't. And eventually the doe has enough. She sees us over there, 3 dudes standing on the middle of a ridge, and she blows and takes off. So they go up and over the ridge, and we're sitting there trying to figure out what we're going to do. And finally we're like, man, it's the last day. They just went deeper into this hole. We've hunted the back side of this hole. We know where they're going. They're going over into that next laurel thicket. It's about 300-400 yards away. She didn't smell us. And you guys know, most of the time, when one boogers you and they don't smell you, they're going to go to the next available secure spot. I mean, Dan, I've heard you talk about killing them that way, where you've come in and you've bumped a buck and then just been like, I'm just going to go up there a few hundred more yards to where I think the next available cover is going to be and kill them there. And that's exactly what we thought in this case. Zach had just done the same thing in Ohio a week or 2 before this, bumped one and then dumped him a few hours later with a gun. So we got over to that ridge and got to looking at the map, and we're like, man, there's 3 ridges that we need to get to before we get in that next laurel thicket. It's about 400 yards. And I could see the tracks in the leaves where their hooves were punching in as they were running off. So we followed those for a little ways, and we were pretty aggressive for the first 2/3 of that 400 yards until we got to that last ridge where we know that laurel thicket is, it's not on the backside of it, but it's through the next ditch and on the face of the opposite ridge. So we're going to creep this next ridge really careful because these deer are likely on the opposite side. 80 yards to 100 yards away is pretty sharp and steep. So we creep the top of that thing. It's dead calm. And we're just standing there, and I'm trying to pick apart that mountain laurel thicket with my binos, just looking for a hair or a tail or a tine or anything. And then we heard a deer sneeze. And we all 3 looked at each other because me, Greg, and Gooch were all together as last morning, and we're all like, that's them. There ain't enough deer on this mountain for it to be anything else. I mean, so we're like, that's them. And we started looking up the ridge and trying to figure out a place where we could stalk them from above and get a shot into that hole that they were in. And we eventually found a root wad on top of that ridge that we felt like we could crawl up behind and look into where they're at. So me and Gooch crawled up behind that root wad, and we kind of kept it right in between where we pinpointed that sneeze. It ain't no different than hearing a turkey gobble at 100 yards. It's like you heard it loud and clear. You knew it was coming from that spot. So we picked a couple landmarks there and swung around, got behind that root wad, and we just basically stalked where that sneeze was. And I got up to that root ball, and I'm like, Gooch, they got to be 80 yards from us. Like, we're going to turn around this thing, and they got to be there. Well, I looked around that root ball, and I immediately saw that like 100-inch 8-pointer. I was like, oh, there's that, middle-sized buck or whatever. So I'm getting ready to shoot him because he's pretty nice. And I get on that. I get my gun up on that root wad. I'm in the scope looking at him. And I take my eyes off that scope and I look down below me, and that thing is at 60 yards in the bottom of the ditch. Standing there, has no clue we're in the world. And I got buck fever so bad I missed him clean on the first shot. Completely whiffed it. I mean, it was not a difficult shot either. With a muzzleloader off a rest, everything. I just pulled the trigger. I got nervous because I saw him there.
Squeezed it.
Yeah, everything wrong. And I missed him, and the smoke cleared, and he didn't move but 2 or 3 feet. He didn't even act like anything happened. He got a hot doe in there. He's not leaving that spot. So I rolled around the back of that root wad and went to reloading that muzzleloader. I didn't even put the ramrod back in. As soon as I got it loaded, I leaned around the side of that root ball, and he was right there, and I waxed him on that second shot through the heart, and he went 15 yards and piled up.
Nice.
But that was definitely when we brought that sucker out of there. Those guys up there were like, "Holy crap! Where in the world did you dig him up?" I mean, we knew when we shot him. It's like, wow, this is really something for here. And I'm sure there's guys that hunt the mountains down there that do better and that kill big ones all the time. But for us, flatland rednecks up here in the Midwest, to just go down there and end up with that thing was a lot of luck involved. But that was a pretty crazy hunt.
So we were talking before the show. This one is probably one of your favorites, right? I mean, or maybe your favorite.
I'd say it's if people ask me what my biggest buck is or my best buck, that's it. I don't know that it's necessarily my favorite hunt. I mean, I love all those hunts are my favorites. I mean, other than Miles, his hunts are the clear winner if I was going to rank them. But if people are over at the house and we're looking at deer, that's the best buck. And everybody's like, why? He's a nice buck, but why is he the best buck? When he's sitting next to that big 6x7 or whatever, it's like, you don't understand that big 6x7 comes from Iowa, where they're rare. They don't get that big very often, but there's way more of them there. And that deer there comes from a place where they rarely get that big. At least on that particular 20,000 acres or whatever, because they check them all in. They know how big they are. And they know how many are coming out of there every year. They're just when I saw what the record was for that place, I was like, holy cow, this thing is close to it. This thing is in the ballpark of the biggest deer they've harvested on this place in 15, 20 years.
Was this the first time you'd ever been there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep, and learned a ton from the local guys just visiting with them day after day. It was so much different than what I'm used to hunting that and there was a couple of those boys down there that I still stay in contact with a little bit now, and they do pretty well. But it's all relative. People, those guys talk down on themselves for shooting 110-inch deer, and it's like, dude, ain't nobody else in the county coming close to that on this place. Like, it's all relative to where you're at. People want to look at the inches or the size of the rack and say, well, y'all got, y'all really great hunters up in the Midwest. You got all these big deer. It's like, I killed that big 6x7 on a property where there's probably 2 or 3 other bucks close to that size. Yeah. But that one with the muzzler there on the side of that mountain, he was the one that size on that whole place, what it felt like.
That's incredible.
Yeah, the best hunter in the country is probably some guy out of Alabama or Georgia or someplace like that's got 50, 100-inch deer on his wall. Nobody will take a look because of the size of the racks.
Yep. Those are the guys you learn a lot from. Like I said, those guys that I met on that public land down there, I got to visit about hunting those deer in those hills and mountains, and it was pretty obvious they knew what the heck they were doing.
A lot of those guys got a lot more experience than us because they got multiple bucks a year that they get to shoot.
Yep.
And your average guy, isn't me or you that travels all over the place. Your average guy hunts his home state. So when you got a guy that can shoot, 2 or 4 or 6 bucks in a year, they get pretty good, because they get a lot more experience than your guys in the north where it's one deer a year kind of thing.
Yep. They have long seasons too. And those killers down there are out the whole time. You know, I've definitely found that to be the case. I mean, we've killed some other deer down south too that meant a lot. It's just a kind of a different world. A lot of the same tactics still apply everywhere you go when it comes to reading pressure and stuff. Like, you know, talking about the pack question that I asked them. That was all because I'm trying to figure out where people ain't going.
Right. That's a brilliant question.
I mean, it just made all the sense in the world when we got down there, Dan. I mean, I'm looking up at the side of this mountain and I'm like, I know these are 90-pound deer, but there ain't no way in the hell I'm getting one out of this thing unless I cut him up and put him in a pack. Like, there's no way. And even at that, getting that buck up out of there was, I mean, I've packed elk out of some absolute holes. I mean, bad. And this was probably one of, if not the toughest pack out that I've ever had.
Wow.
I mean, if we'd have fell off the side of that hill, we were in trouble. It was very, very steep.
You know, you're talking about how big the deer looked with that rack because of the body. Years and years ago, I had a friend up here. I haven't seen him in probably 20, 25 years, but he saved up to go on a hunt in Texas on one of those real big ranches. And they had a 160-inch minimum. And he went down there, and the first day he shot a 110-inch buck, and he thought it was like 180s because it was like a 60-pound deer, you know?
Yep. Yep. Totally different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That body can throw you for a loop when it comes to looking at the rack.
You watch those old episodes of Bucks of Tecumseh.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, my God, these bucks are huge. You know, you see them before they get killed, just these giant racks and that, and then they kill them and they're just on these tiny deer. And it's like, wow.
Yeah, you put a rack on a rabbit, it looks pretty big.
Yeah.
I think they call those jackalopes, Dan.
That's right.
All right. Well, I'm just kind of scrolling here a little bit. We've had so many great comments and questions and that. I know there's stuff that's been missed, but feel free to chime in after as well. When the show is posted, you can always comment after, and we'll try to get some of those answered, and maybe Aaron can hop back on in a day or two if he can find a minute and maybe answer a couple of those questions for you guys. But we appreciate you coming on here tonight, Aaron. We don't want to take any more of your time here. You've been on here for nearly 2 hours and real great stuff. I was really excited that you picked a couple of these bucks because some of them were some of my favorite videos that you guys have done over the years. And it was interesting to kind of hear a little bit more on the inside stuff. You guys always do a fantastic job of kind of getting it somewhat in depth with a lot of the things that you're doing in terms of your gear, that the weights of your arrows, the equipment that you're using. And I think your viewers obviously appreciate that as well, because you're doing something that not everybody else is doing. And it definitely sets you guys apart. And the proof is in the pudding with a large following and a lot of people that are big fans of everything you guys have going on over there at the Hunting Public. So keep up the great work. Anything else you want to touch on? Let's say somebody hopped on here tonight and never heard of you before, and now they're like, hey, this Hunting Public, where can I find out more?
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to come and check us out at the Hunting Public on YouTube or our website. But I will say, like I've mentioned in several of these hunts, there's a lot of beast tactics involved in them. You know, we killed deer before sort of beast tactics and situational tactics happened, but we did it in just a couple of ways. You know, now I feel like we kill them in, all sorts of different ways that lend itself to that. And back in, 2016, 2015, 2017, I was on the forum all the time, asking questions. We were doubling back through old footage at Midwest Whitetail and thinking about asking that question, Dan, why? all the time. It's like, why was this buck doing this on this date, in these conditions? Or why was he bedded here and we spooked him out of this spot twice in 2 weeks or whatever? It's all stuff that hadn't thought about before. I'd found a way to kill him before that, and I was just relying on that one way. It's like you hunt the downwind side of doe bedding areas in the rut, and you just try to hunt funnels, and eventually one walks through. And we killed him doing that. And it worked. But what you realize is that there's so much more that you could learn about them, especially when you challenge yourself and put yourself in new and different environments all the time. You really have to adapt and figure out the deer there on their terms. And that's probably the most enjoyable part of this whole thing for me.
Thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time with us, and hopefully we'll have you back on again in the future here.
Sounds good.
All right. Until next time, guys, stay safe, get out there in the outdoors, enjoy the summer, get your scouting in, and start gearing up for a new hunting season. We'll see you guys next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central for an all-new episode of the Hunting Beast Report.
Thanks, everybody.